I was standing in the middle of my own living room, holding a pair of mud-caked $1,000 sneakers that my 24-year-old son had just tossed at my chest like I was some lowly servant in the house I paid for, when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Make sure you get the scuffs off the leather this time, and don't take all day. I have a party to get to." In that moment, as the literal dirt from his expensive lifestyle stained my shirt, something inside me didn't just snap. It evaporated. I realized that I hadn't raised a son. I had spent 2 decades carefully engineering a monster who viewed my love as a weakness and my hard-earned wealth as his birthright. Within 24 hours of those shoes hitting my floor, I had executed a plan that I had been quietly preparing for months, just in case he ever pushed me too far. I emptied the joint business accounts he thought were his playground, liquidated the assets he was too lazy to track, and vanished into the night with exactly $2 million, leaving him with nothing but a mountain of debt, a luxury apartment he couldn't pay for, and the mud-caked shoes he wanted me to clean. Was I wrong for stripping my own child of the lifestyle I gave him? Or would you have done the same thing if your flesh and blood treated you like garbage while living off your sweat? I need to tell you how a father goes from being a provider to being a ghost, and why I don't feel a single ounce of regret for leaving him in the dirt he thought I belonged in. To understand how my son, Kyle, turned into the person who would tell his own father to clean his shoes, you have to understand the life I built from nothing. I grew up in a household where we shared shoes, where the electricity was a luxury, and where my father worked 3 jobs until his heart literally gave out. I promised myself that my children would never know that kind of struggle. When I started my logistics and supply chain company 30 years ago, I was the first one in the warehouse and the last one to leave. I built Vance Logistics brick by brick, contract by contract. By the time Kyle was born, I was a millionaire. I thought I was doing the right thing by giving him everything. He went to the best private schools, he had a personal tutor, he traveled the world on private jets. I thought that by shielding him from the struggle, I was protecting him. In reality, I was just making him soft, entitled, and incredibly cruel. As Kyle grew up, the warning signs were everywhere, but I was blinded by a father's guilt. The guilt of being away so often to build the business. When he was 16, he crashed a brand new car I had bought him for his birthday, and instead of being grateful he was alive, he screamed at me because the interior color wasn't the exact shade of tan he wanted. I laughed it off then, thinking it was just a phase. When he went to college, he didn't study. He spent my money on bottle service, designer clothes, and influence. He dropped out after 3 semesters, telling me that he didn't need a degree because he was of Vance, and the company was his anyway. I made the mistake of bringing him into the business, hoping that responsibility would change him. I gave him a title, a corner office, and access to the company credit lines. Instead of learning the trade, he used the office as a place to host his friends, and the company accounts to fund his social life. He started talking down to my employees, people who had been with me for 20 years, calling them the help, and threatening to fire them if they didn't bring him his coffee fast enough. The tension between us reached a boiling point over the last year. My wife, his mother, passed away 3 years ago, and she was the only one who could truly keep him in check. After she was gone, he stopped pretending to respect me. He started making moves behind my back, trying to convince the board of directors that I was getting too old, and that the company needed a fresh, youthful face at the helm. He didn't realize that the board was made up of my oldest friends, men who had seen me bleed for this company. They told me everything. I realized then that my son wasn't just waiting for me to retire. He was trying to push me out so he could sell the company for parts and live off the proceeds. I started moving my personal assets into private offshore trusts and separating my legal ties from his. I wanted to see if he would change, if some part of the boy I used to hold would come back. But then came the afternoon of the shoes. I had come home early after a long day of legal meetings, feeling every bit of my 60 years. Kyle was in the foyer, dressed in an outfit that probably cost more than my first warehouse. He had been out at some dirty construction site looking at a property he wanted me to buy for him to develop into a nightclub. He looked at me, saw I was tired, and instead of asking how I was, he kicked his sneakers off right at my feet. The mud splashed onto my slacks. He told me to clean them because his assistant was off for the day and he couldn't go to his party looking like a peasant. It wasn't just the request. It was the look of utter disdain in his eyes. He truly believed I existed only to serve his needs. I didn't say a word. I picked up the shoes, walked into the kitchen and set them on the counter. He laughed, called me good man, and walked upstairs to change. So that's the situation I was in. I was a man who had built an empire, only to be treated like a floor mat by the person I had built it for. I stood there looking at those shoes, and I realized that if I stayed, I would be cleaning them for the rest of my life. I had the keys to the kingdom in my pocket, the access codes to the primary business liquidity accounts that he had helped manage but didn't actually own. I had already set up a new life for myself in a country where the extradition laws were in my favor and the weather was always warm. I had a choice. I could keep trying to fix a man who was already broken, or I could take the money that represented my life's work and leave him to face the reality of the world he thought he owned. Before I tell you about the minute-by-minute execution of my disappearance and the absolute chaos Kyle woke up to the next morning, I want you to pause and comment below. If your child treated you like a servant after you gave them every luxury imaginable, would you cut them off completely, or is a parent's duty to provide unconditional even if they're being abused? Tell me what you would have done in my shoes, the ones I didn't clean. That night, while Kyle was out at his party, popping $3,000 bottles of champagne on my dime, I went to work. I sat in my home office and logged into the primary vault. Because I was the founding chairman, I had override authority. I initiated a series of staggered transfers, $2 million in total, moving the funds through a network of prearranged legal channels. This wasn't just some impulsive theft. This was the exit strategy I had spent months perfecting. I then went to the garage and took the most inconspicuous car we owned, leaving the Ferraris and the Lamborghini. He's behind for the repo men I knew would be coming soon. I had already resigned from the board via a timed email that would hit their inboxes at 8:00 a.m. I also sent a very specific letter to the bank, notifying them that I was no longer a guarantor for Kyle's personal loans or his luxury apartment lease. I drove through the night, crossing the border before the sun even hit the horizon. By the time Kyle woke up, likely with a hangover and a sense of invincibility, his world was already collapsing. He tried to use his black card to buy breakfast, and it was declined. He tried to call the office to scream at the accounting department, only to find out that office was closed for a restructuring audit, and that his access badge had been deactivated. My lawyer, the only person who knew my location, called him at noon. He told Kyle that I had retired, moved away, and that he was now legally responsible for the $400,000 in personal debt he had racked up under the assumption that I would always cover it. The apartment he lived in, I had stopped the payments, the car he drove, registered to the company, and since he was no longer an employee, it was reported as unauthorized use. The aftermath was a beautiful, cold justice. Kyle tried to sue me, but my legal team had made sure every cent I took was legally mined dividends and deferred compensation I had never drawn over 30 years. He went from a penthouse to a studio apartment in a month. Without my name to open doors, his influence vanished. His friends, the ones who loved his parties and his yachts, disappeared the second the champagne stopped flowing. He reached out to me through my lawyer, crying, begging, saying he didn't mean the shoe comment, and that he was just stressed. He said he was his father's son, and that I couldn't do this to him. But I told my lawyer to give him one final message. You told me you didn't want to be a peasant. Now you get to see how hard the peasants work to earn the life you threw away. It's been a year now. I'm living in a small villa by the ocean. I don't have a staff. I don't have a logistic empire to run, and I certainly don't have any shoes to clean but my own. I hear through the grapevine that Kyle is working as a junior salesman for a rival firm, getting yelled at by bosses half my age. He's learning what it's like to be on the other side of the counter. Maybe one day, when he's worked 10 years for what he used to spend in a weekend, I'll consider speaking to him again. But for now, the silence is the best teacher he's ever had. I didn't just take the money, I took his safety net, because that was the only way to save whatever soul he had left. The moral of this story is that you cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot raise a child in a bubble of gold and expect them to understand the value of the dirt it's built on. I spent my life providing, and in doing so, I almost destroyed my son's character. My revenge was actually the only real parenting I've done in 20 years. I gave him the gift of struggle, and I took the $2 million as a consulting fee for the lesson. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by walking away, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who finally stood up to their entitled families. Share your final thoughts in the comments. Was I too harsh, or was $2 million a fair price for my freedom? I'll see you all in the next story. ***, would you like me to generate a VIP style long title and a 2-word powerful tagline for this specific unfinished shoes or revenge story as well? ***.